Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, ladies and gents, all great people and lovers of the hand-drawn arts. You are listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast, and I'm your humble host, Mike Rosado. Today, we get to listen in on a killer chat I had with the international star, the national treasure, and my own new personal hero, Lisa Congdon. Lisa is an incredibly talented illustrator and fine artist whose prime example, numero uno, on how to successfully make a 180-degree career pivot. Working with clients like Facebook and MoMA, writing numerous books and touring across the globe for speaking engagements, Lisa definitely has created a niche that is filled with passion and vision and absolutely shows no sign of slowing down. Listen in as we dive deep about her career, working through highs and lows, and lessons that inspired her new book about finding your artistic voice. So sit back, relax, and let's talk with Lisa. Lisa, thank you so much for being on our podcast. This is very exciting. I mean, I'm a huge fan, honestly. I just, and it started to happen, I think, deeper and deeper as I first started to find out about you. It was more from just becoming a fan of your art visually, just enjoying looking at it. But as I continued to dive in, I became more enamored with you, not only as an artist, but as a person. And I think that's maybe why I was so excited to hear about your new book, Finding Your Voice, which we can talk about in a second. And in fact, I'd like that to be a large part of what we talk about, because I think it's so important. So firstly, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your kind words.
Oh, absolutely.
That's very sweet of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of dive right in. So firstly, for those, to give you a little bit more background, Lisa, the Pencil Pushers Podcast is a podcast that dives into many different genres of the hand-drawn arts. It's the love of the hand-drawn arts in general. So we invite guests who are in the animation field, the comic book field, the graphic arts field, the graphic design field, hand lettering, and all those types of things. So just to give a little bit of a background, Lisa, obviously you're an illustrator, an author, a fine artist. You're previously a teacher. I would still consider yourself very much a teacher. You're still obviously doing that quite a bit with your speaking, your books that you write. You're a wife, you're an advocate for the people, and you're also personally my own personal hero now.
Thank you.
Yeah. And again, to go back, I mean, I think one of the main reasons is because you're utilizing your talents to help inspire others, which I think is a big part of what's important to me. I have a brand design company. I am an illustrator. And largely as I've sort of figured out what it is that I wanted to do with my life, I started thinking about what were the core things that were really important to me. And I think largely that had to do with finding my own voice as a human being, and also how that was expressed through art. And so it was great to see somebody who was really embodying that at such a core level with your artwork. And so as we start to talk about your book, which I should be very clear, the name of the book is Find Your Artistic Voice, The Essential Guide to Working Your Creative Magic. I find that finding your voice is almost an existential question. And it seems like your life has been, at least on the outside, your life seems like it's been sort of trying to find what your voice was. And perhaps this is a culmination of the book was sort of a culmination of what that has been for you. Can you explain a little bit why this book was important for you to write?
Well, it's interesting. The book came about in a sort of straightforward way, however, and which I'll tell you about in a second.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think it evolved into something bigger than what I had originally intended for it to be. And I think that's often the case when you sit down to sort of explore a topic.
Yeah.
At first, it seems very simple, and then it becomes something deeper. So originally, I used to keep a blog, and still online. I don't update it anymore because I have other things that I spend my time doing now, but I used to keep a blog. And one of the things I was interested in a few years back was what people wanted to learn from me. So I had already written a book called Art Inc., The Essential Guide to Building Your Career as an Artist. And I had taught a lot of classes online about business topics. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know, of my followers' interests, like what were they interested in learning about? And one of the things, I did a survey, and one of the things that came back that was very high on the list was sort of finding your style. People weren't necessarily saying finding your voice, but they were saying finding your style. So I translated that into a blog post I wrote, was pretty short. Here are all the things that make up a voice and, things you can do to help develop your voice. Mm-hmm. And my editor at Chronicle Books, and it's a publishing house that I've worked with for a long time, she read the post and she was like, "This isn't a blog post. This is a book. I know you have more to say about this." So I was like, oh, okay. So originally the idea for the book came from her. And it was like, I think you could really dig deep into this topic. And then sure enough, as I started to research creativity and, the way we develop as creatives and how and then I started to sort of dive into my own journey in finding my own voice. And I interviewed like 11 people for the book. Mm-hmm. And I started to do research on what do we mean by voice, and write about that. It really did become more about my sort of a mirror of my own path, which not only to find my artistic style, because style is one aspect of voice, but voice is so much more than your style as an artist.
Absolutely.
And for me, that includes a lot of, sharing with the world a lot of the stuff that has helped me get through hard times or has helped me get through the creative process. So I sort of embody I have a visual style, but I also, a lot of my work, not all of it, but a lot of it has messages attached to it. And so that is definitely part of my voice and the way that I sort of show up in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And so you, backtracking a little bit, just to give a little bit more history, because it's kind of remarkable in a lot of ways. And I was thinking about this earlier as I was thinking about what we were going to chat about. To me, I feel like your story is important for a lot more people beyond the arts. I feel like your story is so important for people who, I can't remember what the poll is, but you've probably seen similar surveys or articles that have talked about how most people are miserable at their jobs. Yes. They hate their jobs. They do it because they need a paycheck to pay the bills and get their kids through college and, pay for health insurance, et cetera. But your story is so different in the sense that if we backtrack, you literally started getting into your this career 15-ish years ago, correct? Or even maybe a little bit. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I started painting and drawing when I was 32. I'm 51 now. So I've been sort of, pouring myself into creative endeavors for 20 years. Yeah. But I didn't know at first that it was something you could do for a living, or that I even had any potential. I imagined that if I wanted to be a professional artist, I would have to go to school, and I would, So yeah, my path was both later in life and getting to where I am now was not the traditional way that a lot of people do it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember hearing you in another interview say that you were you thought of yourself as the least creative person in the universe. Yep. And I kind of see you as the least creative person in the universe.
My perception of myself as a creative person has certainly changed. I think part of that is I grew up in a family where my brother and sister were labeled as the gifted creative ones, and I was labeled as the hard worker. Mm-hmm. And so my parents gave me a lot of positive feedback for sure, and I definitely was held up as a role model about certain things like discipline and, I always had a good attitude, and my mom says that I had, joie de vivre, whatever. Like I was a good kid who tried hard.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I felt that I had nothing to offer the world, but I certainly didn't think about myself as artistic or creative at all. Like that just wasn't my sort of story or my mythology in my family. And, my brother and sister, on the other hand, were sort of labeled as the creative ones. And so, I grew up not imagining or not pursuing that I would like creative endeavors. Like I've always been a creative. I look back and like, I've always been a maker. I've always dabbled and had creative hobbies. And, I had the great fortune to be in a relationship when I was much younger with a woman who was a professional graphic designer, art director.
I'm sure that helped.
Whose life, really revolved around art. And she really introduced me to.
How old was this? How old were you around that time?
I met her when I was 23.
Okay.
And we were together until I was 30 or 31. And so, in my 20s, I never imagined myself the artist, but I was consuming art because she introduced it to me. And that, was a really magical, the relationship fell apart, but I have like really fond memories of learning about, all of these people who are my idols now, and for the first time. And then actually, ironically, around the time she and I broke up, I had been in this relationship for so long that I needed other things to fill my life, because I was single for the first time in my adult life since I had graduated from college, because I met her pretty quickly after I graduated from college and moved to San Francisco. And so immediately I just started making things, and I started taking art classes. And
so is this around 10 years later? Is this where this started?
Yeah. So this is around, 10 years later. I was 31, 32, 33 years old, and set up a little studio in my kitchen table, and I took some painting classes and drawing classes. And this is before, Skillshare and all of the online platforms where you can learn anything now. So I was like buying books and consuming a lot of, art and design. And I had been already with her through her, but then I decided to, as an outlet, I was going to try to make some stuff myself. Like, again, never imagining that it would ever turn into a professional career.
Yeah.
So because, partly because like anybody, as a beginner, my art was really terrible,
Right.
I think I had good taste, and,
but I have to ask you, I mean, you're obviously clearly incredibly talented now. And so, okay. When people saw you making maybe even just little arts and crafts stuff when you were in your 20s, or even as a teenager, did anybody stop? I mean, surely there was an inkling that said, oh, this girl has some talent. Nobody said, you know what? Have you ever thought about potentially getting, there was no conversation of, like, your girlfriend didn't say, wow, actually I really like that little thing you made? Or
maybe not as a teenager, because honestly, I was more interested in sports than I was in art in high school.
Okay.
And so I also saw, of course, I didn't fit the stereotype of the artist because I was kind of a jock. But anyways, in my 20s, definitely my partner at the time, she was like, you're really, and now she's like my biggest fan and so proud of me. And I think she's sort of astonished, because while we were together, I was starting to make things and starting to be creative, and it definitely showed an interest, and I would make things for her, and I would decorate her house. And, I think she probably knew I had it in me, but it wasn't until, I was single for this really long period of time that I started kind of pouring myself into making. And sure, I started within a couple of years getting positive feedback. So, in around 2004, I started a Flickr account, and so I always joke that like Flickr was like the original Instagram. And I met people there who I'm now friends with, who are really important parts of my life. including many other artists and photographers and people who are sort of either just starting their creative path or like me dabbling in stuff for the first time. Around that time, I also started a blog. It wasn't necessarily an art blog. It was just like a personal blog, different blog than I have now. And
what was the artwork like, though? What were you producing?
oh gosh, I was making collage. I was making acrylic paintings. I was making these shadow boxes. So IKEA was selling these boxes. I think they intended for people to put like display 3-dimensional things in them.
Yeah, like a candle.
But I would just make 3-dimensional art in them, and I was selling those. I was using all of these materials that I'm sure were not archival, and I feel sorry for anyone who bought any of those pieces at the time because they probably are completely fallen apart because I didn't know what I was doing. But yeah, I was painting. I was drawing with ink. I've always my work is really colorful now, but I went through, the first part of my career was a lot of line drawing in black ink on white paper. I've always collected old ephemera and vintage, had a love for vintage things, which still shows up in my work, but definitely. I would collect old paper and draw on it. So my work, I feel like the bones of my voice and my work at the time were similar. Like I've always had a very consistent color palette, even since then. Been attracted to folk art imagery and had definitely had, always been influenced by graphic design. But my work has definitely both grown in terms of my skill level in my ability to execute things. And then also just my style is refined because you can't show up and make art every day for 10 years and not develop a style. It's just what happens. So, and that's what happened to me. And I still feel like my style is ever evolving in a way, but because I get bored easily. so I feel like the seeds were planted back then for sure. And
at that point, though, were you starting to feel a burning desire to continue doing this? Like, when did it start become this sort of like a fervor of sorts, where you're just feverishly?
I would say about 3 years in.
And you were a teacher at this point, is that right? Were you?
No. At this point, I had left teaching and I was working at an education nonprofit, and that was actually a big reason that I was able to make so much art. Because when I was teaching, I was definitely interested in art at the time, and that's and was already kind of consuming a lot of art versus making a lot of art. But I was teaching, and I taught elementary school, like first grade. It was like the hardest job I ever did. I mean, on my worst day of being an artist, and I definitely have my bad days, this is never, it's like nothing compares. Teaching is so hard. And so I was exhausted and working these really long days. And then I got a job in an education nonprofit. I decided to leave the school where I was teaching. And I actually went to work for an organization that was working in collaboration with the school where I worked. That's how I got the job. And immediately I had all this time on my hands that I didn't have before because I was working 9 to 5 without all the stress that I had had. Because I had an office job and it was just a lot calmer and without all the emotional stress. And so, that combined with the breakup that I mentioned earlier, like I just kind of decided art was going to be my new hobby.
And what did your siblings think at this point? The ones who were adored and I
think they
revered.
were confused. My brother, right. I don't even really know what my brother thinks because I've never really talked to him
even
about
today?
it.
Even today, you don't know?
Yeah. I mean, we're not super close. So,
okay.
I mean, he knows I make art and he's very complimentary and, he's somewhat curious about what I do. But my sister and I are very close. She's 2 years younger than I am. And I think she was like,
are you the middle child?
Now it doesn't faze her, but yeah, for sure. Like I remember one time, I might have even mentioned this in the book. I was like sitting on her living room floor and her kids are in their late teens now, but they were toddlers and they were mesmerized, like watching me draw one day. And my sister said to me later, like, I was watching you too. And I think I was thinking like, wow, was this buried inside of her since she was little? Or what? Like, this is weird because I had never shown an interest in art in this way. And I became obsessed with it, literally. Like you asked about, when did the fervor start? Like about 3 years in, I realized like, well, first of all, I had all this time, so I started doing it all of the time. And then I would like not go out with my friends on the weekends because I wanted to stay in and work on my projects. And turned the front room of my house into a studio. And I just kind of got really into it.
And very, very important question here. Were you still single at this time?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I met someone a couple years later. That relationship only lasted a couple of years, and then I was single again for another 4 years. So really, the majority of this sort of exploration, I was single, and honestly, I'm glad, because I was like married to this new passion I had, and I think things went a little faster for me because of that, because I spent so much time doing it. And I had started this blog, and I was on Flickr, and I think the thrill came for me also when I would make things and post them, and people would react favorably. Like, I like this. This is beautiful. Can I buy this or whatever? And that was also like this, it's one thing to make art. It's another to have other people enjoy it.
Yeah.
And there's something very addictive about that, And
I
feel like that's been a motivating force for me to both improve what I do and to share what I do, is that I love the community that's built around art. And I don't just mean my own. I mean, like, I am in a community where there are other artists sharing work, and it's really gratifying.
Yeah. Did you have any detractors at all? Like, a lot of times you'll find that your external community will be very supportive, but the ones that are closest to you might be going, what are you doing?
Well, definitely. I don't think they feel this way anymore, but both my parents, my dad more so than my mom, were like, wait, what? You're giving up a job where you make this much money and you do this kind of, you have this position. Because basically I went to work for a nonprofit organization, and, within a few years I was, an associate at the associate director level, and it was making good income, way more than I would have made as a teacher. And I was working at a nonprofit that was well funded. And I think my dad was like, wait, you're giving this up, this prestigious job, and to do this thing that, inevitably you're going to fail at, because that's what artists do. Like, they starve, right? That's the myth.
Right.
And, but I think, ultimately the hard worker in me and the sort of untapped, or the right brain part of me, the creative side of me that hadn't really been tapped until then, just the combination of those two things. And, I had all this work experience, and I was an adult, and I kind of understood how to run a business.
Yeah.
And so, like,
you actually had a business as well,
kind of, made me dive in. And of course, I had people in my life who were like, are you crazy? But of course I showed them. So it worked out. But I definitely had people who didn't understand. Nobody was like, don't do this. But I think my dad was super dubious, and even my mom a little bit.
Sure.
Probably.
So going back to what I was stating before about how I find that your story is one that should be told beyond the realm of the artosphere. For many people who want to pivot and try something else, maybe a passion that was embedded inside of them, suppressed in some way because their parents wanted them to be one thing or another, for fear of being a starving artist or whatever it might be. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on, you seem to have a very rare combination of being both very organized and also fearless. And so, tell me if I'm wrong here, but the combination of the two, usually you find somebody who's very organized but also very adverse to, mistakes or doing something wrong. And then you got the fearless one who's just like, fuck it, we're just going to make a mistake here and it's fine. And we'll clean up the mess later, and we'll learn something from it. How did you combine those? Firstly, would you find that you have those two, and wouldn't you agree that is fairly rare?
Yeah, I don't know if it's rare. I mean, I don't know, but I would definitely agree that both those things are true. So I am, and have always been my entire life. Like I have fear and anxiety about things. I just have this ability to plow through it anyway. So I'm not fearless in that I don't, feel fear. I definitely do. I do things anyway, even though I'm scared.
Yeah.
I mean, not everything. Like I'm, I'm definitely not risk averse. So I'm definitely one of those people who, if I get an idea, even if it sounds crazy, I'll try it, or I'll dump a bunch of money into investing in some thing that I think is going to, or time or money into something that I'm not sure if it's going to succeed or not. I also think I have pretty good instincts.
Yeah.
And most of the stuff that I've invested in has worked out. Not all of it, but most of it in my business. Yeah. And I'm also super organized. And so I am, I kind of embody like both this kind of wild, like
Sense
my
of
wife always
exploration.
jokes that on my tombstone will be written, "We'll figure it out." Like whenever there's like a situation where anything in my life, I want to try something, or I want to go travel somewhere. I want to do something. And she's like, we can't do that because X, Y, and Z. Or have you thought about all these factors that are going to make that hard? And I am forever saying, we'll figure it out. I want to do this.
Yeah.
And so there's that part of me. And I'm also one of those people who's super organized and methodical about making sure those things happen. And so I do feel like that's a good combination outside of my whatever artistic talent I've developed over the years that has certainly helped my career.
How would you suggest somebody that wants to potentially pivot and try a new career? How would you suggest that they go about doing that if by chance that they're not as organized as you are or as disciplined, like for let's call it the average person, who still has passions to potentially try, to want to try leaning into something else besides their normal 9 to 5. What would you say their first steps should be?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that it's not going to happen overnight. And so patience is incredibly important. And that was also something, I feel like that's another sort of bit of my formula that doesn't get talked about very often. But when I was first starting out 10 or 12 years ago, and when I say starting out, I mean on my business, not with painting and drawing. So I decided to turn it into a business. And I think, originally I was like, wanted to try all these things, and I couldn't even imagine that I would do what I do now, but like I had a picture of where I wanted to go next. Right.
Yes.
And that's the first step, is like knowing where you want to land. Like, what are your dream opportunities? And then sort of backwards planning those. So, figuring out, well, to get to that place, what are all the steps to get there? And like, you just literally, start with the simplest thing. And it takes a really long time to get to the final thing, and you have to be really methodical. And I remember just waking up every morning. I was totally broke at first, for sure. It didn't have, I think sometimes people look at people like me who have big internet followings and successful careers, and they just imagine that, we woke up one morning and we decided we were going to do this thing, and it's always been the same. But like, I went through all of the typical struggles that anybody trying to start something went through. And what I think was important in my case was that like, I had the maturity to know that, and the life experience to know that this wasn't going to happen overnight, that I had to work really hard, and then I had to get myself up every morning and keep going. And if something failed, I had to try again. And I just had to keep practicing and keep trying and keep putting myself out there, even though it was exhausting. And I had to be really patient. And then eventually I hit a tipping point, and I knew that tipping point was happening. Like, I just knew it. And it wasn't like magically I started making money or anything. It was more just like,
You talking about an emotional tipping point, or are you talking about
like a career tipping point? Like I started selling things more, and like I started getting illustration jobs, and I signed with I had signed with an agent like years earlier, and that like finally started to pay off. And like, so it was like all this stuff started to happen where I was like, oh, I know I'm going to be okay. I may never be super like financially like, successful, but I'm going to be okay. I'm going to make enough money to support myself doing this thing. I just knew it. Where previous to that, I was just going on blind faith.
Yeah.
There was no evidence that I was going to be successful. And so I had to just keep showing up anyway. And I think that's kind of the first bit of advice, is to sort of like map out a plan for yourself and just keep showing up, because you're not going to get the satisfaction that you get later in your career when things start happening regularly.
Right.
In the beginning, it just doesn't. You have to do it because you love it, or because you're motivated and driven, not because you're going to get immediate satisfaction, because it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So create that vision, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about that. I wrote this book called Art Inc. And the first or second chapter is all about like basically like mapping out your dreams and goals and then getting really practical about them.
Awesome. In line with that, and now moving a little bit more, or continuing with the theme of finding your voice, as you're mapping out what you're envisioning your career to be, somewhere in the future for you, what about how you started to define what your voice was? What was your thought process there in terms of being an artist and developing your voice?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize and acknowledge is that we're all influenced. Like most artists and animators and graphic designers become that because they're interested in art, and they're interested in the art of other people. Like we all have, like particular genres of art, or we're all attracted to certain kinds of art, or maybe we have favorite artists that we want to emulate. And that was certainly true for me. So in the beginning, I didn't necessarily have a solid voice. Finding your voice is interesting. For some people, it happens very quickly.
Yeah.
And for some people, it takes a really long time. And I was probably somewhere in the middle there. But, and so I was like collecting inspiration constantly, not just from other artists, but from periods in history and from things that I saw out on the street. And I was sort of a sponge. And then I'm trying to sort of process all of my inspiration and spit out something new. And that was really clunky and clumsy at first, I think. I mean, even I think back to like, I signed with an agent in 2008. And I don't really feel like I kind of solidified my voice until, for like 5 more years. And I was working professionally as an illustrator before and that's because I'm such a risk taker, right? Like I just do stuff because I want to do it.
Yeah.
But and obviously I had this pretty prestigious agent who, believed in me enough to work with me, but I was like really, not sure who I was. And she was so great. She really believed in me, and she really mentored me and helped me sort of like hone things. And one of the things that I did, for example, was in 2012, I did this project called 365 Days of Hand Lettering. Or maybe it was in 2011. I can't remember. But anyways, back in the day.
Yeah.
8 years ago. And every day so one of the gaps that I felt in my voice was that I didn't have a hand lettering style. I didn't know how to hand letter. So I just studied hand lettering for like a year, and I produced things every single day. I would hand letter quotes and letters and phrases and sayings as an assignment, and I would post them all on my blog. And you can't do something every day for a year and not get better at it. So that's sort of like my hand lettering style now is different than what evolved in that year, but that was really like the starting place. And so I kept doing a lot of projects in the beginning, which really helped me kind of figure out who I was, because you sort of start with the inspiration, but then you have to internalize it and then make it your own. And that's easier said than done, because we're taking in so much inspiration constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I was no different than anybody else in that way.
And were gigs coming in at this time?
Yes.
So you've got your personal projects with the intention of hopefully getting better here and there. Then you still had gigs that were coming in, so you felt there's a comfortability there.
Yes, it wasn't like now where my work is in high demand, and I'm like, but it was definitely, I would get something every few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to daily. I don't take work daily, but like I get offered jobs pretty frequently. And then it was like enough that it gave me hope. And that was sometimes came directly to me. Sometimes it was through my agent. But I was like, okay, yes, I can do this. And then, like I said, and I just sort of hit a tipping point where it started to be regular, like inquiries once every 2 weeks, or big enough projects that paid enough money to sustain me for a few months, things like that. And then I was like, okay, the hard work's paying off. And that's really motivating as well.
Yeah. You talk about in your book, somewhat related, you talk about in your book that there's a top 10 list to building skill, and practice is probably mentioned 7 times in that list. How do you practice outside of doing 365 days of various different areas?
Well, in the beginning, when I had fewer paid professional projects, and I would obviously have more time to do personal projects. So I was doing these like year-long things and then month-long things here and there. And then I stopped doing them a few years ago because my professional life became so busy that I just didn't have time for personal projects anymore. Mm-hmm. Or at least ones that were like daily, kind of thing, personal challenges. But I still spend a fair amount of time outside of work drawing, for example. And so in September, it will be 2 years since I started drawing digitally. So previous to that, I was totally analog. I was scanning, I was drawing on paper and painting on paper and scanning and manipulating in Photoshop, but I was definitely sort of starting analog. And I was having some tendonitis problems in my arm, and my doctor suggested that I change up my workflow and my work situation. So a lot of my friends had gotten iPads and were using this program called Procreate. And so I was like, I'm going to try this. So I invested in iPad, and because I had never drawn digitally before, there was a learning curve. So I had to learn all the tools, but then also it's just different. Mm-hmm. And so I started drawing more, actually, in my free time, because I had this tool that was so quick and easy, right?
Yeah, same thing with me.
I didn't have to get out any supplies.
Yeah.
And so just literally for the last 2 years, I've been in a new sort of practice, making personal work, a couple pieces a week, just to get better and better at this tool that's new so that I can use it professionally. Because after a couple of months, I started using the program for client work. So that's been an evolution as well. I know from experience that the more time I spend with something, the better I'm going to get at it. Yeah. And so because I love drawing and because I love making personal work, it's something that I can't wait to do. Like when I'm watching TV at night, I sort of integrate it into my downtime. Yeah. And it doesn't feel like work because I really, truly enjoy it. And then I have, personal work to share. Like, for example, just in the last 6 months, I worked on so many client projects. And about almost all of them I haven't been able to share yet because they haven't been released yet. Because so much of what we do as illustrators is, we do it and we sign an NDA, or, you can't share what you're doing. And social media is this place where I have this community of people who enjoys my work. And so I wanted to it also gives me things to share with my community when most of the time during the day, what people don't know is I'm actually not drawing the things I post on Instagram. I'm actually working on my books or my client projects, and I can't share those right away.
Right. You are incredibly conscientious, or at least this is what I've seen of you based on your artwork as well as the interviews. You're incredibly conscientious and self-reflective. How has this informed you as an artist and also finding your voice?
Well, I thank you, first of all. um, I if you hear some jiggling, that's my dog. He's
What's your dog's name?
To join us. Yeah, I decided pretty early on that while a lot of my life and life experience needed to be private, and they certainly have boundaries around a lot of things, that it was valuable for me to share my own experiences with people about struggles that I had been through as an artist or issues in the world that I care about. And I wanted to do that with integrity and use my artwork as a way to talk about those things. Mm-hmm. It's kind of become, part of my voice that I talk about things like everything from like my experiences with anxiety and depression and other difficult things in life to my experiences as a working artist, both positive and difficult, changes that I'm making in my life now as a result. I'm pretty transparent about those things. And I try to do it in a way that's, not oversharing.
Yeah.
Or, but
that
also kind of invites people into the conversation, because I find that the more as an artist I share that my voice really emulates my life experience or my journey, the more connections I make with other people through my work. And if life isn't about connection, what is it really? So I've kind of found that sweet spot, right? And that was a discovery I made really while I was becoming an artist, is that it was really important for me. Being an artist can feel like very isolating. Mm-hmm. Most of us are freelance. We work alone. Even if we work in an office with a team, we're sort of got our headphones on and we're like focused on making the thing. And so community feels really important to me. And I figured out a way to like have that online. And of course, in real life, I have a lot of creative friends in real life. And I think that if I was sort of only making my work and not connecting it with the rest of my life, I wouldn't be as kind of happy and fulfilled as I am.
Yeah.
Like that connection feels really important to me.
Yeah. You mentioned working through issues of depression and anxiety. And if you don't mind me asking, what can you give kind of examples? Is this something that you still kind of work through? And what are some of the ways that you've kind of overcome those issues as you've developed as an artist and having it as a career?
I had a history of pretty intense depression and anxiety in my 20s and into my early 30s. And sort of there was a lot of things that happened in my life around the time that I started making art. And one of them is that I went to therapy with somebody who helped me sort of think differently about my life and my worthiness and my sense of belonging in the world. Mm-hmm. And I had sort of traveled through the world until that point, not necessarily feeling like I had a whole lot of agency, meaning a lot of power to do anything, or that I had any, I had a very low sense of self-worth. And I grew up in a loving home. Mm-hmm. It's kind of complicated to think about, like, how did I turn out that way? Right. Yeah. That I was this kid in her 20s and early 30s who, thought very little of herself and didn't think, that she could make anything of herself in the world, and that she, I like even really didn't feel like I deserved a healthy relationship, all the things, or that I was ever going to find something to do with my life that I loved. Yeah. And while I was sort of in the process of unraveling all of those beliefs about life and about myself, with this therapist and kind of flipping them around, I was simultaneously started making art. And as I mentioned earlier, I sort of became obsessed with making art. Like it was this thing outside of myself that was also part of myself that I started to live for, instead of living for a relationship or the approval of other people or whatever. And that in and of itself was transformative. Like art and the creative process and the sense of satisfaction that I got from working in, creatively, healed so much of my anxiety and depression. But, I'm probably predisposed to it also. So I've continued to work on that for years. And I think for me too, like just getting older, I have this perspective now about, a lot of the beliefs I held about life. I'm not so sure that my depression and anxiety was chemical. I think it was like really based on just feelings of worthlessness.
Yeah.
And once I really started to work on those and grapple with those and began to feel a sense of empowerment through this new reason to live, things really changed for me dramatically. And I haven't had a major bout of depression or anxiety in a very long time. And I also think just sort of showing up in the world every day and trying to be a light in the world, and to inspire other people has also been transformative. Just focusing on how can I show up in the world positively? How can I radiate love? How can I be a good person? Was also super healing for me. And, and that's not to say I don't have bad days and that I don't go through intensely anxious experiences, and have stress in my career. Like recently, in the last few years, I went through some pretty bad burnout, which kind of manifested itself as depression and anxiety at a, lower level than I had experienced in my 20s. But, I really had to work through that. And so that's the thing about life. Like just when you think you have it all figured out, it throws you some kind of curveball. And that's also very humbling, right? We never arrive in this place where we have it all figured out. It's like a journey, right? And so I tend to look at my difficulties or challenges as opportunities to learn more about myself and, how can I change and learn and grow from this experience rather than this must mean I'm doomed or this must mean I'm a horrible person or I'm not worthy. And there's a big difference there.
Yeah, 100%. And I would gather you probably feel the same thing that I've witnessed, which is I feel that artists and the graphic design community, as I'm embedded in myself. One of the great values I think I find with this community is that we're okay with being honest about the struggles, very human struggles. And I think one of the most powerful ways that the community serves each other is that it shows that we're all human and that we're all connected with these same sorts of issues, and that it's okay to talk about them. And in fact, it's not only okay, it's also beneficial to talk about them so that we can help basically raise each other up, right? And let us know that we're not alone in these feelings. And that's one of the things that I find really interesting about your work is, and one of the reasons why I was so connected to it is because I really felt that, and learning more about you today, that you're really kind of using your voice and what you've learned from the past and things that were important to you to try to get others to realize that you are powerful enough to be the best version of what you don't even know you are yet. And it's okay to have these feelings and you can rise above them.
Definitely. And I think that, it's hard because I think a lot of times people assume that or they get frustrated very quickly. Like they potentially have a hope or a dream to do something with their life, become a writer, or an artist, or this or that, and it doesn't happen right away, right? Like this idea that there's struggle involved, especially when you're just starting out with something. In my book, I talk a little bit about like the creative flow, and it's kind of like learning a language. So whenever you're trying to master something, including a foreign language, it's, there's this level of, this lack of fluency. Like everything is a struggle. There's emotional struggle, there's technical skills struggle, there's all kinds of struggle. And then the more you practice something, the better you get at it, and you get into a flow, and there's less struggle. But the truth is also that the creative process and just life in general, just shit happens, right? And so it's important for people to, I remember when I first started sort of being more open about my struggles, and people were like, what, you struggle too? Like, in so many words, like, it's so comforting to know that someone like you has crappy days or can't figure crap out, And I'd be like, yeah, I am 100% human. And it's a great reminder because, all of your heroes, right? Everybody struggles.
Yep.
And remembering that is so important because you have to give yourself permission to struggle as well, because it's just a fact of life. Like, what you do with the struggle and how you treat the struggle is a whole different topic. You got to use it to your benefit. There's wisdom in anxiety. There's wisdom in struggle. But it's there. And that's so important for people to understand, that just because you don't succeed at something right away, or just because it doesn't come easily to you right away, doesn't mean you failed.
Yeah.
It's just part of the experience of being a creative person.
That's fantastic. Wow. That was very informative. Thank you. So diving into a little bit more of some of the content from the book, which I found really fascinating. One of the things is conformity. You talk about that conformity is for the birds. And and I thought that was this was a really great topic, and it's one that I think that as an artist, it's difficult to sort of traverse. It's a balancing act, I guess you could say. Number one, obviously, as you become a fledgling artist, and even I think as you continue to be an artist who is trying to, quote unquote, maybe perhaps remain relevant, you're obviously being influenced in different directions by people that you admire, or even people that you think you admire, and it's really only because they're more popular than you. Right. What are your thoughts on conformity and how you can strike that balance of being influenced in a positive way without letting it basically take away your own voice, I guess you could say?
It's just part of the journey. I think, conformity is, well, I feel like everyone goes through, or I don't want to say everyone, but the vast majority of us go through this period, especially in the first few years of, exploring ourselves creatively, where we're straddling the planes of independence and belonging, right? So we want to make work that shines, right? So we look to people whose work shines, whose work we love, and we want to make work that looks like that. And sometimes that looks like copying. A lot of times it's not, though. It's more just that we're making work that's influenced by somebody else. Mm-hmm. And the first thing to understand is that's completely normal. Yeah. Like, we are not artists despite other artists. We are artists because of other artists. Like, it's a normal thing to be influenced. So the first step is to not look at it as something that you should avoid or ignore or deny. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that at first. Like, I think it's embracing my influences and really acknowledging them has become sort of part of what I do now. Mm-hmm. And I advocate that other people do that, because the more conscientious you are about, trying to fit into a certain genre of art or make work that looks like so and so and so and so's work. You know, it's okay to do that. It's like also really important to take that seriously and also to try to sort of regurgitate something that is uniquely yours. And the good news for everyone is that your voice, like your hand, your story, everything that makes your voice is part of your DNA. Like as much as you try to make work that looks like somebody else's, ultimately, the more you draw or paint or whatever you do, the more it's going to look like you. And so I feel like the main thing is just understanding conformity or the desire to conform or to belong in the art world is normal. And have your work sort of sit next to these people whose work you admire. But at the same time, the good news is like, that's never sustainable. Ultimately, you have to come up with your own perspective and your own voice. And if you work hard enough at it, it will happen. And, you know, it might mean you have to just do a lot of personal projects. My friend, Andy Miller, who I interviewed in the book and who also has a podcast called Creative Pep Talk, he talks about this project he did early on in his career. It was called the Nod Project. So he would actually literally make a nod to one of his heroes and draw something in their style every day for a period of days. But by the last day of the nod to, you know, a particular person, he would notice that he was further from their style than closer, right? The goal was actually to develop, to integrate all of the best things about that person into his own style. And so there's so many ways that you can be influenced, but also ultimately come up with your own point of view. And it takes a long time. I mean, there are people certainly, doesn't happen so much anymore, but certainly for a few years in there were like, oh, your work looks like so-and-so, or it's obvious you're influenced by so-and-so. And that mortified me, right? I didn't want to hear that, but it was true. And that was just more incentive for me to like move further away from the people that were influencing me and really try to develop my own perspective. So sometimes those messages are hard to hear, but they're valuable.
Yeah, it's interesting. You interviewed a friend of yours, Sean Qualls, who I just discovered as a result of your book. So thank you for that. And he mentioned something similar where he says the magic happens in my own private space when not focused on what other artists are doing. And I find that incredibly interesting because we live in a world of being enamored with social media and always being cross-referenced. And it's a personal thing, I think, a lot of times, cross-referencing with so many others based on likes on Instagram, et cetera, and thinking I'm a complete failure. I'll never be able to do this.
That's right.
And it's interesting that he makes the statement that says, no, actually step away from that. And what I would probably say, and I'd love to know if you agree or disagree, is that it's probably good to have a balance. You know, step away from a little while. It's okay to still be influenced if you feel like you need to step into social media or go to an art museum or go to, you know, a cool boutique shop to get inspiration. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I used to do these little retreats during that time when I was feeling this sort of tug between, you know, being influenced and my own sort of independence as an artist. And I would like go away to this beach house that I would rent, and I would not go on the internet for like 5 days, and I would just make art. And it was amazing what came out of me. And I used to think, oh gosh, it's not going to be possible for me to go make things without looking at photo reference or not looking at like, or not, you know, having some pinboard of inspiration. And then I discovered in that period, it was all in there. You know, you just have to trust that it's there, and kind of forcing yourself, if you feel like it's a problem, that you're too influenced, you know, force yourself to move away from that. And it's going to feel really uncomfortable at first. But if you just want to, it's like any uncomfortable feeling. If you just sit with it for long enough, it dissipates. And then it's amazing what can happen creatively when you're free from all of that stuff too. So yeah, it's hard. It's like we're in this world where it's sort of necessary to be, or at least I feel like for me, it's necessary to sort of be in this world of art and design. And like, I definitely follow what's trending and like, you know, thinking about what people are interested in, you know, in all of that. But I also have to spend a lot of time in my own space without looking at that stuff so that I can make sure that I'm, you know, listening to my own inner voice and like tuning out all of the noise.
So, yeah, a couple final questions as we round out the hour here. On that note, you've obviously developed an incredible resume at this point and a tremendous following on social media and clients with the biggest companies in the world, essentially. There is a certain standard and a certain style and a certain voice that you have developed over the years. Do you ever feel a sense of fear of evolving from where you are now and potentially abandoning that audience?
I think about that, but I don't fear it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because I'm 51 and I'm already like, in the last 12 years, I have already done so much and had the privilege of working with so many amazing clients and been part of amazing art shows. And just, I have produced so much work, and I think a lot about like, you know what if I wake up one day and I just don't want to do this anymore? I can't imagine not wanting to be an artist, but what if I don't want to do social media anymore? Or what if I don't want to, like recently I decided I'm going to take a hiatus from client work. And what if I decide I don't want to? Is this for real?
Is this for real, by the way? You have?
Yeah, that's for real. Like, so right now I'm not taking any, I'm doing one pro bono job for an organization that I love, but I'm taking a break, and I'll probably come back to it. I can't imagine not doing client work at all. But I make enough income from other things that I don't really have to. So part of that is a privilege, right? That I've probably earned through my hard work. But I also am just kind of burned out. So I'm like taking a break, and it does occur to me a lot. Like, what if I decide I want to completely change the focus of my career? I want to become a sculptor, or I'm going to like only do this and not that. And for whatever reason, the thought that I could change up what I do at some point doesn't scare me. It just excites me. I don't fear that I'm going to lose my creative juice. And believe me, there are days I wake up and I have zero creative juice, but it always comes back. And I think that's how I know I won't ever lose it completely.
Yeah.
You know, barring like Alzheimer's or some other horrible, unfortunate thing that could happen. Like, I don't, I know what I've got, and I might change sort of the focus of my career or how I spend my time, but I know I'm always going to be creative. And the fact that I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 5 or 10 years doesn't scare me. It actually is like the coolest feeling, because I know it'll probably be something different and interesting, and what's not to look forward to, you know, in that, right?
What a great way to end this podcast interview. Lisa, this is fantastic. Can you let us know about when the book is available? Because I know at this point.
So the book comes out on August 6, 2019. And it's actually available for pre-order on Amazon now.
Okay.
If you go to my Instagram, there's a link in my profile to order it and to learn more about it.
Okay, awesome. And anything else that's next that we should keep an eye out for?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, well, I'm working on a few other books quickly. Next year, I have 2 books come out. They're both children's books, actually, which I'm super excited about. I've been working for 3 years on a book on the periodic table of elements.
That sounds awesome.
10 to 14-year-old kids. I'm illustrating it now. It's all written. So it's a science book, big kind of encyclopedia.
Right. Are you writing and illustrating, by the way?
Yeah, I wrote it already.
Okay.
And then I'm illustrating it now. I'm almost done with that. And then I'm illustrating a book for toddlers that somebody else wrote that I'm having a blast with. And that also comes out next year. And that one is called Round. And it's all round things. And I'm working on another adult book that is sort of a book of like life advice that will come out in 2021. So I've definitely got a lot.
You got a couple things going on.
A couple things brewing. Yes.
That's fantastic. Sure. And lastly, where can we find you?
So the place I hang out the most is Instagram. It's just my name, @Lisa Congdon. And then I'm actually launching a new website in August, but it's the same URL as the one I have now. It's lisacongdon.com, and you can look at my portfolio and learn about all my classes. And
when is that launching?
All that stuff. Oh, that website, probably mid August. Yeah. Okay. So soon. Yeah. I'm working on it as we speak. Actually, before you and I hopped on the phone, I was like going back and forth with my designer about image sizes for my portfolio.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yep. Awesome. Well, Lisa, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us today. And hopefully you have a great bike ride, which I believe that you're heading towards right now. So we are definitely looking forward to the books being released, and hopefully we will chat sometime soon. Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. Be sure to subscribe, tell a friend, tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead, and we're out.